week, the game is Groo the Game. Groo the Wanderer was a comic book that debuted in the 80s, the mid-80s. And it's one of the most successful, independently owned, like the creator owns this character and all of it, because he's used him in a couple different properties, like in Marvel and other stuff, but he always, like, he delayed starting his own comic with the character until the 80s, which was like 10 years after his first debut, because he was like, I want to own the character, and every publisher that he was working with was like, no, we want to own it. And he was like, nah! So he did end up independently publishing a monthly comic book series called Groo the Wanderer. Very funny, about a bumbling barbarian to kind of parody the likes of Conan and that ilk. In 1997, there was a card game released called Groo the Game, published by Archangel Studios, co-designed by the creator, Sergio Aragonés. There was a 2 to 4 player version of the game with a 5 and 6 player expansion released simultaneously. Steve Jackson Games has now picked up the license, and they just released, just this week, the second edition of Groo the Game came out with some new artwork from the creator himself, and it is all in one box now, the 2 to 6 player game. Otherwise, I think it is the exact same game as the original edition. And the rulebook itself says that the sweet spot for this is 5 players. So there are 5 of us. We're gonna shuffle up that deck and deal out 5 cards to every player. Rulebook says that the dealer gets Groo to start with. There's this one Groo card. When Groo visits we're all owners of or like rulers of a different town. Okay. And we are competing for glory to try and make our town the most glorious. Okay. When Groo visits town, it's probably bad news for your town.
Oh, okay.
He's trying to help, but he's real bad at it.
Okay.
Damn, okay.
If in the initial setup you get any purple bordered event cards, those don't ever go into your hand. They go into effect immediately. But during setup, we don't use those. So we'll just, if you get any purple event cards, hand it back to Dustin, and we'll replace them. When setup is done, I guess since Dustin's dealing, I'm going to give him Groo. When it's your turn, you're going to have this phases card. That's a nice little reference sheet for what happens on your turn, but it's also going to be whose turn is it tracker. You are, throughout the course of the game, you're going to be building up your town. Yellow building cards will go in the bottom row. Green troop cards will go in the top row.
Okay.
This is your army that's trying to defend your buildings. These are your victory points. If somebody gets to 7 victory points at the end of a turn, the game is over, that player wins.
And it's just the red circles.
Yeah, the little red circle. They're either going to be 1 or 2 points. Every building is 1 or 2 points, I think, at the most. There might even be some that aren't worth any points because they do other stuff, because there's effect text at the bottom as well. As you construct cards, which we're going to talk about how you do that, you'll be laying them out in your town like this. Green cards in the top row, yellow cards in the bottom row. Any multicolored wild cards, you just play based on whatever the text says. These are the only cards, I believe, that can really be played during another player's turn as like a reaction. But they could also come into effect during your own turn. On your turn, you go through all of these phases. The first phase is the discard phase. It's optional, but you can discard any number of cards that are in your hand, because then the next phase, you draw back up to 5 cards.
Ooh, okay.
Then we'll move into the attack phase. I'm going to talk about that later. That is optional, where you can choose one player's town to send an army of troops to attack. But we'll talk about how that works in a little bit. The next phase is the construction phase. During this phase, you're going to take all 7 of these dice and roll them. The first die that gets resolved is the Groo die, this black one right here. If it lands on the dog, Groo stays wherever he is, which at the moment is in front of Dustin. If it lands on one of these arrows, it's going to move in that direction, 1 player, or 2 players, depending on what it lands on. And when Groo comes to town, bad stuff could happen to you. So you don't want Groo with you. There's not a whole lot you can do to stop him. But that's the first thing that happens during the construction phase. You resolve Groo's movement or not. Then you're going to look at all of these raw materials dice, and you're going to spend them to enlist troops or build buildings based on the cost that's on the left side of the card. So I'm going to allocate this guy, these 2, to enlist that cavalry. I'm not going to be able to build this building because I don't have any others of these guys. So maybe I'd look through other cards in my hand and figure something else out. But you allocate dice to use these cards. Groo effect cards will have a number from 1 to apparently 3 Groo heads on the left side, so you can spend Groo heads that you roll to play Groo effect cards. These basically are just going to do bad stuff to whoever has Groo in their town when you play them. So you're going to spend these dice during the construction phase to play cards from your hand. Then, when you can't spend anything that's left, or you don't want to, then you move into the leftover phase, where you pass all of those remaining dice to the player to your left, who then gets to try and construct cards from their own hand using whatever's left. If they still have dice left over, it passes to the next player, and so on around the table until all of those dice have been spent, or everybody's had a chance to spend whatever the leftovers are. Second draw phase, you draw back up to 5 cards, and then you pass the phase card to the player to your left. So, that is the shape of a turn. Let's go back now and talk about how attacking works. During the attack phase, you can choose 1 other player at the table to send an army of troops to attack. You'll allocate any troops that you have already constructed in previous turns. Since the attack phase comes before construction, you won't be able to enlist new troops before you send them into battle. But you'll allocate any number of troops that you've already got to that battle, and you'll look at their strength value here to indicate or their attack value, I guess, to indicate their strength. Whatever the total of all of those skulls is, that's the strength of your attacking army. The player who's being attacked can then allocate troops from their army to defend with. Again, they have to already be on the table, and then you'll look at their defense number there for their strength. If the attacking strength is greater than the defending strength, you will subtract the higher number from the lower number, and that is the amount of damage that is being inflicted upon that player's town. They lose that many victory points worth of buildings that all get discarded to the discard pile. The rulebook says you cannot destroy half of a building. So, if this is what's in my town, and I only take 1 victory point worth of damage, I'm not discarding this building.
Gotcha.
You have to do enough to actually take out the whole building.
And damage doesn't stack.
It doesn't carry over or anything like that. All troops that are allocated to the battle on both sides go to the discard pile. If we get to the end of the draw pile, we will reshuffle once to reform it. If we happen to get to the end of the draw pile a second time before somebody's gotten to 7 points,
then something's gone horribly wrong.
We'll reshuffle again. The current player's turn ends. Everybody else gets 1 more turn, and then whoever has the most victory points wins.
Got it.
Most likely, somebody's going to get to 7 victory points before that happens. Hey, thanks for checking out BNB Tabletop, the home of the Board and Barrel. A live show every Sunday night at 5 p.m. Pacific where me and my buddies play board games. If you haven't seen it, you're missing out. We like to keep things interactive with our Buff and Nerf house rules that allow you to influence the course of the game, and virtual bingo cards that could win you a free board game of your own. So do us a favor, do yourself a favor. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ding that notification bell. Thanks again for stopping by. We'll see you Sunday night.